Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I'm joined by Christoph. Hey, buddy.
Hello. How is everybody doing today? I guess let me just ask you, Dale. How are you doing today? And I'll assume
Oh, I'm doing
great.
fabulous, and I'm sure everybody else is doing fabulous too
Yes.
because they get to hear us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Good. We're aligned, as they say.
So, today we're going to be covering something that has to do with December. I want to see if you can guess.
All right. There are two things that come to mind. One of them is not Navy related. I'm guessing Pearl Harbor.
You are correct.
Yes.
December 7th, 1941. So, you ready to get
Yes,
underway?
sir.
All right. So, since it's December, we're going to be talking about December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, the attack that brought the U.S. into World War II.
Nice. I mean, well, not nice, but you get it. I'm enthusiastic to pursue this conversation. Let me be clear.
But not enthusiastic about the loss of life itself.
Correct. The act itself was terrible. I want to be on record for being against the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Good backpedaling. I'm proud of you.
There may be an elected position in my future, so you gotta. I don't think there is. That's impossible. But a guy can dream.
Yeah. Yeah. You can run for dog catcher.
Yes. I love dogs. I want to be on record that I love dogs.
Okay, you are so on the record.
Yes.
All right. So, war between the Empire of Japan and the United States was seen as a possibility since the 1920s. Japan had been pretty wary of the American territorial and military expansion in the Pacific and Asia since the late 1890s because they annexed islands such as Hawaii and the Philippines, which the Empire of Japan thought was within their sphere of influence.
Right.
And at the same time, the Japanese strategic thinkers believed that Japan needed economic self-sufficiency in order to wage a modern war. The experiences of World War I had taught them that modern wars would be long, very involved, would require total mobilization and create vulnerabilities for trade embargoes and encirclement, sieges.
Mm-hmm.
So because of this, Japan needed access to strategically important resources like iron and oil. And of course, Japan being a island chain, they did not have those resources in abundance.
Right.
So Japan had begun to take a hostile stance against the U.S. after the rejection of the racial equality proposal.
Wait. What?
The racial equality proposal.
What proposal was this, and what did it entail? And are you saying that America did something racially motivated?
This was a proposal to abolish racial discrimination as a amendment to the Treaty of Versailles.
Okay. Oh, so
This was considered at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference.
I see. So that was the treaty that ended World War I, and they were going to add ending racial discrimination?
Yeah.
Oh.
Japan wanted that in there. The U.S. said, no, we're racist, and we want to stay racist.
Okay. I mean, okay. I think it is good to be clear that racism is bad. it is
Oh, absolutely.
weird to have that in a peace treaty, don't you think? Like, does that
I don't think so because of the racism prevalent in the world then, and realistically, even today.
right? No, I've been to many countries, and it is a problem that is throughout the world.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. I guess I always saw peace treaties as limited um contracts. You know what I mean? Like, what would it take for us to stop fighting? And that seems like a very broad idea. And I don't, you know what I mean? Maybe it
Yes
does fit.
and no, because remember the peace accords during for the end of World War One basically stripped Germany of most of its military.
Right. Yes.
So there's a lot of different things that can go into it, and every nation that participated has a say,
True. That's an
and they have their own goals and what they want.
that's an interesting say from Japan.
And you put it in written form, it can actually be litigated on.
Right. It can have diplomatic impact, and I mean, it didn't go in there, and then
No.
Nazi Germany became uber racist. So maybe it would have behooved the world to include that. So yes, okay, I can see your point.
So even though the US rejected this proposal, they did have a cordial enough relationship to remain trading partners. So tensions really didn't grow too serious until Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Over the next decade, Japan expanded into China, leading to the Second Sino Japanese War in 1937. And they spent a considerable effort trying to isolate China and try to secure enough independent resources to attain victory on the mainland.
Hmm.
So, starting in December of 1937, events like the Japanese attack on the USS Panay, the Allison incident, and the Nanking massacre did not help American opinion on the Japanese.
I can see that.
Yeah. The US proposed a joint action with the UK to blockade Japan. This did not work.
I'm surprised. Well, kind of. I know the U.S. and the U.K. had some of the stronger navies, but I know there was a lot of demilitarization after World War One, so they may not have had the equipment to do so. And Japan, on the contrary, was really ramping up.
In 1938, after President who?
1938. Well, that had to have been Roosevelt, right?
That was Roosevelt.
Okay.
He made an appeal to American companies to stop providing Japan with implements of war.
Hmm.
So they didn't get the blockade. They'll just say, hey, we won't supply arms anymore.
That's interesting that he appealed directly to the to industry. You know what I mean? I know today there are laws that say you cannot. There are some materials you cannot export to certain countries, and we have a very specific list of countries and specific list of materials. So I guess that was
Yeah.
before all that was codified.
Trade embargoes.
Hmm.
In 1940, Japan invaded French Indochina,
Ooh,
attempting to stop the flow of supplies reaching China. And the U.S. halted shipments of airplanes, parts, machine tools, and aviation gasoline to Japan, which Japan was like, this is not friendly, guys.
no,
The U.S. did not stop oil exports because partly of the prevailing sentiment in Washington that given Japanese dependence on American oil, this would lead to a extreme reaction from the Japanese.
I could see that. Yes.
President Roosevelt moved the Pacific Fleet from San Diego to Hawaii. He also ordered a military buildup in the Philippines. He hoped that doing these two things would discourage Japanese aggression in the Far East.
Okay.
You look confused.
Well, so a lot of these things aren't overt acts of war. I don't know.
No, they're
Yeah,
not
they're
acts of war at
right.
all. They're a warning.
Yes, multiple warnings. Pretty. They're still trading, but I mean, I don't know. I guess I always have to think of it in the context of what's happening today. So, like, we have trade embargoes with countries. We're not at
Yes.
war with them, but it's just an economic attempt to persuade them one way or another. Okay, that's what America is trying to do
Yes.
to Japan in this context. Got it. Continue. Just seems like there's a lot of move. We're concerned about Japan. We're making a lot of moves as a result of that. So continue.
Right. Roosevelt's taking out his big stick and waving it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Japanese high command was certain that any attack on the United Kingdom's South Asia colonies, including Singapore, would bring the U.S. into the war. This, of course, was not going to happen if they had done this, because the U.S. did not have a treaty with the UK of mutual defense, which is why we weren't in the World War II yet in the first
Right.
place.
Exactly. We were loosely involved with Lend-Lease Act and things like that.
So they thought a devastating preventive strike would be the only way to prevent American naval interference. A invasion of the Philippines was considered necessary by the Japanese war planner or planners. I'm sure there was more than
I'm
one.
positive. I agree.
The Americans had a plan called War Plan Orange that envisioned defending the Philippines with an elite force of 40,000 men.
Wow.
This was never implemented because of MacArthur. He felt that he would need a force 10 times that size.
And so did he get anything? Like, that's thumbing your nose at 40,000 guys isn't great if you don't get any guys, right?
Well, we had a presence in the Philippines.
Okay.
We were building up
Yes.
in the Philippines.
But he was just dissatisfied with the how much or how little we were building up, right?
Yeah, he was like, I need more guys.
Okay. I'm with you.
Give me 400,000, not 40.
It's a lot of guys.
So by 1941, American planners expected to have to abandon the Philippines at the outbreak of any war. Late that year, Admiral Thomas C. Hart, commander of the U.S. Asiatic Fleet, was given orders to that effect. They're like, get ready to go ahead and evacuate our guys from the Philippines.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So the U.S. finally stopped sending oil to Japan in July of 1941 after they had seized French Indonesia after the fall of France. There was a couple of reasons for this. Because one was because of new American restrictions on domestic oil consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, if a major power falls and they don't have the ability to defend themselves, that is the perfect time for an opportunistic country like Japan with imperial ambitions to seize their very faraway territories, especially when they're full of nice raw materials that they can use for their war effort.
Mm-hmm. And that's what they need and want is raw materials. So because of the decision to cut off the oil, Japan proceeded with plans to take the oil rich Dutch East Indies. And on August 17th, Roosevelt warned Japan that America was prepared to take opposing steps if neighboring countries were attacked. In other words, don't do
Oh
that. We're
yeah,
watching
and
you.
we're gonna do something if you do that. Do that. Anyway, you get it.
Yes. Japan and the U.S. engaged in negotiations during 1941, trying to improve relations. And in the course of these negotiations, Japan offered to withdraw from most of China and Indochina after making peace with the nationalist government there.
Okay.
They also proposed to adopt an independent interpretation of the Tripartite Pact, which was the Berlin Pact between Germany, Italy, and Japan,
Oh
signed in Berlin
yes.
on September 1940. And they also proposed to refrain from trade discrimination, providing all other nations did the same thing.
That seems fair.
Washington said no.
Right.
So the Prime Minister of Japan, Minister Kono, then offered to meet with Roosevelt. But Roosevelt was like, no, we're going to have an agreement before we meet.
Wouldn't the purpose of a meeting be able to hammer out an agreement?
I think Roosevelt was like, we're going to reach an agreement before we meet because I'm not going to sit here and just hash this out. These are our terms. Take them or leave them.
Well, okay. That seems counterproductive, I think, or could be. But of course, I'm not in that context. I wasn't alive during that time frame, and I wasn't. I didn't have presidential authority, so I didn't know what the Japanese are doing or what was going on domestically. There's a lot of fish to fry during this time. So,
There was a lot going on domestically too during this
yes,
time
absolutely.
and around the entire world.
Yeah, there was 10 years of Great Depression. We're just kind of
Yeah.
starting to get out of that. So, lots going on. And no need to waste time, I guess, if it's not going to go anywhere.
Mm. So reach an agreement, and then you come in person to hash out the specifics.
Makes sense. Okay. I'm with you. Thank you for clarifying that, Dale.
You're welcome. The American ambassador to Japan was told Roosevelt, you need to accept this meeting. This is really the only way to preserve, even a margin of respect with the Japanese government and keeping us from shooting each other in the face.
Looks like he was right. I mean, maybe not the only way, but it's especially for a
Yeah.
culture that is so big on honor. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Uh, to
Yeah.
to refuse to meet their leader, I mean, what does that communicate?
Lots of things to lots of different people.
Yes, we will have to have a Japanese historical expert to give us more insight into that. I suppose I can't. I can only speculate.
Yeah. So, of course, the American ambassador was ignored by the Roosevelt administration.
All right.
And something that didn't help was that the Kano government collapsed the next month afterwards,
Oh,
which means that the Japanese military comes in and takes control.
okay.
And they're like, we're not taking any single troop out of China. Military's not going to give up what they've already taken.
I can see that. I know historically the Japanese army and navy were at odds for
Mm-hmm.
much of this time period, and so
Oh, yeah. Infighting was
yeah,
rampant. Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, any country's military branches are going to be there's going to be infighting,
Well, I
but not to the extent that the Japanese infighting and actually the German infighting as
oh,
well.
I wasn't aware of the German infighting as much. I guess yeah, that makes sense though.
Yeah, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army were all battling each other's as well.
Different objectives, different priorities. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and the Navy also fought Navy. German Navy fought German Navy too,
Oh,
because
that fractured.
there was guys are like, we just need a huge surface fleet, and there's guys that say, no, we need more
Oh,
submarines.
I see.
But we'll get into that
Okay,
more
sorry.
later,
Yes,
where we get down to World
I
War
am
II.
good at inserting distractions. Let's go back. Go back to the main thread.
Yeah. So Japan sent their final proposal on November 20th and offered to withdraw from southern Indochina and to not attack Southeast Asia as long as the US, the UK, and the Netherlands supplied 1 million US gallons of aviation fuel,
Holy moly!
lifted their sanctions against Japan, and ceased aid to China. And it's like, you're going to give us these things and we won't attack Southeast Asia. And, we'll get out of Southeastern Indochina. But give us supplies.
Right. For no reason. We're not going to use these supplies to conquer any other places.
Well, the other places they're already in, they were still going after
Oh,
China.
yeah. That's for sure.
So the Americans sent a counterproposal on the 26th, which was the whole note, and it required Japan to completely evacuate China without conditions and conclude non aggression pacts with Pacific powers.
I can see if you have a country run by military officials that are dominating the region and they get a proposal like that, that's a no-go.
Mm, yeah. Uh, so they received that counterproposal one day after.
Oh, their initial proposal?
No, they received the counterproposal one day after the Japanese task force had already left for Pearl Harbor.
Oh, man. Yeah.
The Japanese intended the attack as a preemptive action to keep the U.S.'s Pacific Fleet from interfering with their planned military actions in Southeast Asia against overseas territories of the UK, the Netherlands, and the US.
Hmm.
So, over the course of 7 hours, there were coordinated Japanese attacks on the Philippines, Guam, and Wake Island, and on the British Empire of Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. From the Japanese point of view, it was seen as a preemptive strike, quote, before the oil gauge ran empty.
Yeah. I guess if you can't do anything in the future, your only choice is to do something now. That seems like such a
Yeah.
risky venture, though.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was
I
very
mean, yeah,
risky.
with hindsight,
And
it was
it turned out to
devastating.
be very bad. And it's not really hindsight. People in the Japanese government knew this was a very bad idea.
So, who was pushing it and why? I mean, I guess you kind of explained the why, but they just thought they would rely on their local military dominance because they were very effective. But then, as they kind of ran short of supplies and they didn't have the industrial capacity of an America, for example, there's only so much they could do.
Right. Well, there was also the feeling from the Japanese people that they were better than everybody else.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that contributed to the feeling of nobody can beat us. We can do
Up to
this
that
and
point,
nothing's going to
not a
happen.
lot of people could. I mean, they defeated a Russian army and the Chinese, and it wasn't even close. Like they were very dominant, and I think the West in particular was very surprised because they thought, oh, Japan has a good military, for a non-white military. Because as you mentioned before, there was a pretty strong undercurrent of racism at that time. But then when they beat Russia, which kind of had been playing in the Western playground for a long time, it was very shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think people considered the Japanese to be backward
Hmm.
and, low tech, that they wouldn't have the technology that a more quote unquote developed nation would
Right.
have. So yeah, no, it's bad on all counts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one thing. They definitely, what is it, the Meiji Restoration, they call it? That where they just said, hey, this is what we're doing, and we're going forward, and we're developing now. And technology, society, like everything advanced very quickly. And so
Yeah.
they were very capable.
Yeah, they made the decision that we need to surpass everybody
Hmm.
to be able to make our mark onto this world. And yeah, they went for it. Did a really good job.
Yeah.
I agree, 100%.
So anyway, sorry to distract. Continue.
No, it's fine. So the planning for the attack on Pearl Harbor began in the early months of 1941 under Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who was then commanding the Japanese's combined fleet. He got the assent to formal planning and training for the attack from the Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff after a huge fight with naval headquarters. He actually threatened to resign his command if he didn't get what he wanted.
Whoa.
So full scale planning was underway by early spring of 1941, mostly by Rear Admiral Ryansuke Kusaka, with help from Commander Minru Genda, as well as Yamamoto's Deputy Chief of Staff, Captain Gamito. One of the things that they did was that they studied the 1940 British air attack on the Italian fleet
Hmm.
very closely. This was their Bible for this attack, as it were.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Because that was one of the outstanding questions that I had. Because in World War One, air power was not what it was in World War Two, and so you wouldn't dare attack a ship with a plane. That would have been suicide. But with the technological advances, that was a possibility. But that was such a coordinated attack. How did they come up with these ideas, or how did they even conceptualize how it was going to go? And so this is a key fact that I was unaware of, but that's
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Yeah. So over the next several months, pilots are trained, equipment was adopted, and intelligence is collected. Now, Emperor Hirohito did not approve the attack until November 5th, after the third of four imperial conferences that they had to talk about what was when it was going to happen and if it was going to happen.
Hmm.
He was hesitant to engage in a war at first, but eventually authorized the attack, even though there were advisors that were like, no, dude, we cannot do this. This is very bad. So, final authorization was not given by the emperor until December 1st, after a majority of Japanese leaders advised him the whole note would, quote, destroy the fruits of the China incident, endanger Manchukuo and undermine Japanese control of Korea. So before the attack, he became more involved in military matters and even joined the Conference of Military Counselors, which was considered very unusual for him. Additionally, he saw a more active role in information about warplanes.
Hmm.
So, according to an aide, he openly displayed happiness upon hearing about the success of the surprise attacks.
I could see that. I mean, that was a very effective attack, and they didn't even have to use all the waves of planes that they had originally planned. It was devastating and complete.
No, it was not complete.
Well, with the exception of the ships that were on exercises away from the harbor, correct?
No, they made a mistake by not sending more waves,
Oh,
by not completing. There were plenty of things that did not get hit that should have been
I
hit.
see. Then,
No, it was not complete. Not even
okay.
close.
Then that's my misunderstanding, and maybe we'll get into it a little bit later, but what caused them to not continue?
We'll get into
Okay,
that
cool.
later.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Keep tuned in, listener.
So by late 1941, observers believed that hostilities between the U.S. and Japan were imminent. A Gallup poll just before the attack on Pearl Harbor found that 52% of Americans expected war with Japan. 27% did not, and 21% was like, I don't know.
That sounds about right.
I don't got no opinion. Leave me alone.
There's a lot going on again at the time.
Yeah. So American Pacific bases and facilities had been placed on alert on many different occasions. But officials were like, Pearl Harbor is not going to get hit
No,
first. They're like, it's going to be the Philippines. Philippines are way closer than Pearl Harbor.
it makes sense.
They were also thinking that because of the threat that the air bases throughout the country of the Philippines and also the naval base at Manila were big threats to sea lanes, as well as to the shipment of supplies to Japan from territory to their south.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They also believed that Japan was not capable of mounting more than one major naval operation at a time, which they got completely wrong.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. So the Japanese had several major objectives for this attack. First, it intended to destroy the American fleet to prevent the Pacific Fleet from interfering with the Japanese conquest of the Dutch East Indies and Malaya and enable Japan to conquer Southeast Asia without any interference. The leaders of the Imperial Japanese Navy were subscribed to Alfred Thayer Mahan's decisive battle doctrine, especially of that destroying the maximum number of battleships. Because up until this time, the battleship was the biggest threat
Right.
that everybody thought was on the sea.
That makes sense. Because up until this time it
Mm-hmm.
was.
The second objective was that it hoped to buy time for Japan to consolidate its position and increase its naval strength before shipbuilding authorized by the 1940 Vision Welsh Act erased any chance of victory. The third objective was to deliver a blow to America's ability to mobilize its forces in the Pacific. And again, battleships are chosen because they were the prestige ships of all navies at the time. And lastly, it was hoped that the attack would undermine American morale so much that the American government would drop its demands contrary to Japanese interests and seek a peace compromise. They thought we're going to hit them hard and fast, and they'll be like, oh no, please don't hurt me anymore. Here's an olive
I,
branch.
I can I can see that thinking. I think there is a decisive there's a doctrine where a decisive victory does yield that kind of outcome, but I think they really grossly underestimated how the Americans would react.
Oh, very
Yeah.
grossly. Yeah. They did have a couple of challenges of striking the Pacific Fleet at anchor in Pearl Harbor. The targeted ships would be in very shallow water,
Hmm.
so it would be relatively easy to salvage and repair them if
Oh,
possible.
I didn't consider that.
And most of the crews would survive the attack since many of them would be on shore leave or would be rescued from the harbor.
Hmm.
Another disadvantage was that the absence of all three of the Pacific Fleet carriers, the Enterprise, the Lexington, and the Saratoga. But even though these concerns were pretty big concerns, Yamamoto decided to go ahead and do it anyway.
Hmm.
The Japanese confidence was so high in their ability to win a short war that meant that the other targets of the harbor, like the Navy Yard, the oil tank farms, and the submarine base, were not hit
Oh,
because they were like, the war's going to be over before the influence from these facilities would have been felt.
I see. Hmm.
Nope.
Complete. Yeah, that was a huge mistake on their part.
Yeah. See, coming back to
Yeah.
that, it wasn't done
No,
completely.
that's that. You help provide the context of why they chose what they chose, what the negative aspects of that would be. Like, for example, I didn't realize I knew it was a shallow harbor, but I didn't realize that there was an advantage to that in that salvaging the ship that is damaged would be easier. Like it's not going into the Marianas Trench. It's just right there.
Also, as we'll discuss later, or will we?
Sure.
No, we won't.
Oh
Nope.
man.
We'll just say it right
All
now.
right.
So that's also why they had to modify their
Mm-hmm.
torpedoes before figure out a way to modify their torpedoes before the attack. Because if they would have just dropped their torpedoes as normal, they would have dropped straight down to the bottom and embedded themselves in the mud, maybe explode,
Right.
and it wouldn't have done anything. So they had to install. It's really a simple wooden tail fin thing
Right. It was very
that they place right over
impressive how
the
simple it
back.
was.
Yeah, they drop them in the water. They did not go down as far. Came back up to the proper depth it needed to be to slam into the sides of those poor boats.
Right.
All right. So on November 26th, a Japanese task force of 6 carriers, the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, the Kiryu, the Shokaku, and the Zuikaku, departed Ikokapu Bay on Iturufu Island in the Cruel Islands, en route to a position northwest of Hawaii.
Okay.
They intended to launch their 408 aircraft to attack Pearl, 364 the 2 attack waves, and 48 on defensive combat air patrol.
Wow.
The first wave was to be the primary attack, and the second wave was to attack carriers at its first objective and cruisers as its second, with battleships as the third target.
Hmm.
The first wave carried most of the weapons designed to attack capital ships, mainly, again, the Type 91 aerial torpedoes that had been adapted. The air crews were ordered to select the highest value targets, battleships and aircraft carriers, or if these were not present, any other high value ships, which would be cruisers and destroyers. The first wave dive bombers were attack ground targets, Fighters were ordered to strafe and destroy as many parked aircraft as possible to ensure that they did not intercept the bombers, especially in this first wave. When the fighters' fuel got low, they were to refuel aboard the carriers and return to combat. The fighters were also to assume combat air patrol duties when needed or where needed, which would mostly be over the American airfields. So before the attack, the Japanese Navy launched reconnaissance float planes from the heavy cruisers Chikuma and Tone to scout Oahu and Lahaina roads, as well as Maui, with orders to report American fleet complements and location. Reconnaissance aircraft flights risked alerting the Americans and were not necessary, though. Because you see a Japanese aircraft in the sky, you'll be like, this is not right.
Exactly.
Also, they already knew the fleet composition and the preparedness information at Pearl Harbor because of Japanese spy Yoshikawa. He was there giving them all the information they wanted. A report of the absence of the American fleet at Lahaina anchorage off Maui was received from the Tones float plane and the fleet submarine I-72. Another 4 scout planes patrolled the air between the Japanese carrier force to detect any counterattack.
Wow, nice. That's pretty well.
All right.
I mean, I'm just looking at it from a strategic perspective. They did a pretty good job of understanding what was there, what the targets were, what to hit, how to do it, where to come from, how to avoid detection as much as possible, but then also the trade-offs of, well, we might be detected, but this information that we gather is more important than that risk. So it's pretty methodical.
Maybe. All right. Well, this is going to be, of course, a multiple episode talk. So I imagine it's going to take all of December to talk about.
Yeah. So it's pretty pivotal.
So we're going to go ahead and end it there for today, and we're going to honor one of our fallen heroes with the help of HeroCards.us. And today we're going to honor Major Brent R. Taylor. His hometown was North Ogden, Utah. Served in the U.S. Army, the Utah Army National Guard Special Operations Joint Task Force. He received a Purple Heart Bronze Star. His date of sacrifice was November 3rd, 2018, killed in action in Afghanistan. He was 39 years old. Major Brent Taylor was on his second term as the mayor of North Ogden when he took an unprecedented year of absence to serve his 4th deployment in Afghanistan. In November of 2018, Major Taylor was killed in an insider attack in Kabul. This made him the first sitting U.S. politician to be killed in action since the Civil War.
Wow.
He is survived by his wife, Janie Taylor, and 7 children. To Brent, God, family, and country were everything, and had become his mantra that steered his life. Brent Taylor was born on July 6, 1976, in Ogden, Utah. From the start, he had always been a leader in his endeavors. He graduated from Chandler High School, where he was elected as student body president and earned an Eagle Scout award. Strongly rooted in his faith, Brent served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1998 to 2000 after his graduation. Brent was called upon to serve in the Brazil Maceo mission. Prompted by the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, Brent enlisted in the military to serve his country. Led by his courage, he would go on to be awarded a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star during his service in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was commissioned as an officer in 2006. Brent had just surpassed the 15-year mark of his military career before he was killed. Brent earned his bachelor's degree from Brigham Young University in political science in 2006. He would later go to the University of Utah for a master's of public administration degree in 2013. He was on track to graduate with a doctorate
Oh,
degree before he was killed in action. In May 2019, the University of Utah awarded Brent a posthumous PhD.
oh,
Major Taylor deeply cared about his community and wanted to make an impact. This led him to join North Ogden City Council in 2009. 4 years later, Brent would go on to become the mayor and re-elected in 2017. He was trusted by members of his community and listened to the voices of his constituents. Brent then announced his deployment to Afghanistan. He said it was his duty to serve his country and help train Afghan forces. So, Major Brent R. Taylor, we thank you.
thank you.
Okay, XO Christoph, take us out.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate that you're here with us. Hopefully you learned something or were entertained or both. We talk about a lot of different stuff. If there's something you liked, didn't like, want to find out more about, or have a question about, there's ways to get a hold of us. So here they are. As always, you can email us at usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We are on x.com or twitter.com. We're on both. That's how um, we're so widespread. We're on both sites. So check us out there. We have the same handle on both. It's at US. Oh gosh, I was blustering so much. Okay, hold on. US Navy History. No, USN History Pod. That's it. USN History Pod. I think So just check one or the other. We're there. If you are confused, the show notes have the right link, so just click on that. And really, I should have just said that at the top, and that would have simplified everything. Anyway, speaking of show notes, there you will find links to hero cards. You will find links to our Discord server. So if you want to join that and talk about stuff, we're there. So as always, thanks. Tell a friend, tell a family member, let them know you listen. Maybe they're interested. Maybe they want to find out about some details about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, or why December 7th is such a big deal, or how they tried to put the recognition of racial reconciliation in the Treaty of Versailles. Who knew? So tell somebody.
You didn't.
And I'm sure somebody else didn't either. So rate, review, that helps us. That gets us more spread out, and we get to get into more ears, as it were.
All right, guys, with that, we're going to wish you fair winds and following seas. Bye, everybody.
Bye.